Welcome, welcome everybody. Good morning for the early birds tuning in from the Americas. Good afternoon, maybe good evening in some cases as well. We're a global community here with different time zones. My name is Veronica Rebollo, and I am part of Rainforest Partnership. I am one of the World Rainforest Day coordinators and one of the people behind Rainforest Ambitions, which is the global summit that we are launching for the very first time in celebration of World Rainforest Day, which is already tomorrow, and where we are exploring different approaches and perspectives to rainforest conservation and restoration, and trying to create spaces for cooperation and dialogue across people, nations, and sectors. And today, day 2 of Rainforest Ambitions, we are focusing on action, on movement, on turning ambitions into actions that are materialized on the ground, and on how we are meeting conservation and restoration and sustainability goals on the ground. So I would like to welcome you all to this first session, which is the first session of the day, titled Breakfast/Chat with ICLEI, What Can Cities Do to Protect Rainforests? And I'm here today with 3 amazing women, which happen to be as well my former colleagues and my good friends that are experts in the urban sustainability field, each one from their respective fronts or focus areas. And the 3 of them are working at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, which is, in a nutshell, a network of 2,500 cities that are committed to sustainable urban development. So in this case, our panelists are representing the European Secretariat, and they work alongside local and regional governments in the design and implementation of larger scale international projects of sustainability, maybe renaturing projects or circular economy projects. And they are also specialists in facilitating knowledge exchange across cities around the world. So it's my pleasure to greet Daniela Rizzi, Senior Officer for Nature-Based Solutions and Biodiversity and a true advocate of urban nature. So welcome, Daniela. How are you?
I'm fine, Vero. Thanks so much for this invitation. Very happy to be here today.
Very happy to have you here. Also would like to greet my dear friend Josephine Hintz, Officer for Global Initiatives, Sustainable Innovation and Circular Economy. She's working really hard to promote the circular economy across cities and countries around the globe. So we're very happy to have you here as well, Jo. How are you?
Hi, Vero, and very happy to be here, and all the best from the very warm city of Berlin.
Yeah, it's warm here in Freiburg as well, surprisingly. And last but not least, would like to greet also very good friend Nea Pakarinen, Officer for Communications and Member Relations, an expert in inclusive communication and in fostering behavioral change for sustainability transitions. So a true communicator. Hi, Nea, how are you?
I am good, and good afternoon here from a very warm Freiburg as well, or good morning to some of you, or evening, and very happy to be here.
Welcome. Yeah, I'm so happy actually to be here with you. As we were discussing before, you're representing the urban realm that's quite underrepresented in these conservation restoration dialogues. Yeah, and probably because traditionally urbanization, unsustainable urban growth and sprawling has been flagged as one of the main drivers of ecosystem degradation and loss, either directly or indirectly, due to the increasing demand for space, housing, goods and services, and food. But now this paradigm is changing, right? Because cities are being each time more perceived also as a source for opportunity, where innovation often happens, and as agents of change and key elements for the transition for more sustainable futures, rather than just the source of sustainability challenges. And this is as well the case for biodiversity and conservation, just more. But now, before diving into content, let's talk about, or into the discussion, let's talk a little bit about the specific connection of cities with rainforests, which is the topic that brings us here today. Because, you know, in the case of tropical cities such Manaus or Iquitos, this correlation of how tropical cities are impacting positively or negatively the surroundings ecosystems, in this case, Amazonic ecosystems, is quite obvious. But it's not always, I mean, this correlation is not so obvious for European cities or Occidental cities in general, right? Because the impact on distant rainforests may be a little bit more obscure or abstract, and is not necessarily direct, or at least not caused by the same problems. But there is, right, there is a connection, because Western cities are often the ones that most resources demand from the global South in terms of food, medicine, and commodity. So, yeah, I mean, to start with the conversation, a question for you, and feel free to answer it. Nea, Daniela, Josephine, doesn't matter, is working in this urban sphere, directly in these big scale projects and like these regreening projects, are the impacts that European cities have on distant ecosystems, especially in the global South. Is this point considered at all? Is this one considered, acknowledged, addressed? Or is it something still distant? Yeah, sorry, Daniela, go ahead.
I think this question is a very, very important one. And I think it's a very critical question as well. That I must say that in the H2020, the projects funded by the European Commission, which is called H2020, Horizon 2020, and the new program now, Horizon Europe, I think this is not really usually addressed, you know, the impacts from, let's say, the European cities and the consume patterns and, you know, everything that arrives here, that comes from the global South. I think this is not really something that is so explored to understand, you know, the workings around this kind of even problem, I would say, right? Because it is a disbalance and it's not really being addressed, I must say. But there are some new projects now that are such topics. So I would mention like the Connexus project. It's a new project that was launched now 1 year, and it's starting to gain pace more and more. It's going to run for another 3 years. And this project is with a lot of South American cities. So we are working with the city of Bogotá, Buenos Aires, Santiago del Chile, and São Paulo. And we also have participation from NGO from Lima, from Peru. And of course, this is a topic that we would like to raise, you know, the European consume, you know, related to, to how this is dealt with in the global South. And so talk about the problems that come around this, right? So thank you for asking this. I think it's a very important question, and I wish it was a more discussed question, to be honest.
Perhaps building on perhaps building on what you mentioned just now, Daniela, kind of the kind of responsibility inherent to the consumption patterns of European cities is definitely a high priority. I think, coming from my perspective, that it's rooted in kind of how to build more local sustainable economies and enable cities in Europe mainly to purchase more sustainable. I think that there is an increasing awareness about global supply chains and decisions that are being made here in Europe and how that overall impacts local realities elsewhere across the supply chain. And in general, it's super complex because you don't only have the demand side and then the supply side, but you have a variety of actors in between. So you have perhaps the kind of final assembly, but you really have a myriad of subcontractors. You have multiple organizations that are influencing how the supply chain works, and it's always evolving. And that goes then down to, for instance, the mining stage, where rare earths and minerals are being extracted, for instance, in the Amazon. And so having this complexity creates a challenge for then the public buyer in a city who is tasked to perhaps just buy a certain batch of computers for the city administration, being aware that those products may not be sustainable or are associated with certain conflicts and ecosystem destruction. However, how do you then equip that person with the skills to buy more responsibly? And this is what ICLEI has been working on as a topic for around 24, 26 years now. Yeah.
Thanks,
And
Jo
I guess,
and Daniela.
yeah.
Sorry, Nina. Yeah. No.
Just add to that, as Daniela mentioned, I think what we're increasingly doing is also pulling in cities from further afield, not just Europe, to collaborate on these projects, especially when we are implementing practical solutions directly in cities. There are a lot of lessons learned that can be transferred further afield as well. And maybe some lessons of learned from urban forestry can be taken up, let's say, in other ecosystems. And like Daniela said, increasingly we are pulling in some South American cities, for example. We have a new project dealing with wastewater management and circulation that's called NICE. And that involves actually a city in Colombia as well. So I think there's considerations being put into this, and especially how we can transfer the knowledge that's being gathered further afield, so it doesn't just stay within our little circles here in Europe.
A spontaneous question that emerged from this that you're telling me is like, I see in these projects there's an increasing cooperation and exchange in between European and Latin American cities, and that's great. Is that exchange bidirectional in all the cases, or is unidirectional, meaning what happens in Europe is transferred to Latin American cities and not the other way around?
Yeah, so we talked a lot before about capacity building, yes, and now we changed this more to knowledge exchange. So we are no longer using in our projects the word knowledge transfer. It's not about transferring, and although many of the proposals talk about transferability of solutions, we are also very careful about how to frame this. I myself, as a Brazilian, I'm very sensitive to some text of these proposals. And I always say it's not about transfer, never. It's always about the exchange of experiences. And we have really been, experiencing now in the last projects that the European cities are also learning a lot from Brazilian experiences, Peruvian experiences, with also local populations. So people are very creative of how to do things with very little resources. So they're very creative. And this is really, it's really interesting to see a city like Malmö, which has like a lot of resources to deal with vulnerable groups, saying, oh, we are learning something from Quito. And, and there is a eye-level exchange and a lot of respect. And so I think this is a little bit changing. And I mean, the idea that the European Commission always says nature-based solutions to, let's say, position Europe as a champion, as a world leader in nature-based solutions. I always refrain from using this. I never use this in my projects. Also, I mean, it is everywhere in the proposal writing, and it is seen as one of the key things, but we are very critical about this, and we don't use this in ICLEI Europe NBS group at all. We are very careful about, it's not about positioning Europe as a leader in NBS, it's not about that. is about exchanging knowledge, right? So, yeah.
Exactly. Thanks, Daniela, because I think you touched a very important topic here. But before, well, the fact that Europe wants to position themselves as pioneers in nature-based solutions and so on. And now we're living in these times of reconciliation with nature, where suddenly we realize nature can bring benefits to our cities. Let's try to integrate it as much as possible. But actually, these solutions that we are using in European cities that may be based in, let's say, urban gardens, for instance, regenerative agriculture and so on, have been already addressed in many other areas around the world, and especially by indigenous communities, right? It's like techniques that they master. And it's interesting that we want to declare ourselves as Europe pioneers in this aspect, but these solutions have been there and have been like perfected years by years. But before getting into this point, just for the audience, because there's quite a controversy around the terminology nature-based solutions as well. Can you explain us what we are referring to when we talk about nature-based solutions?
Yes, sure. Nature-based solutions is actually, it was coined by IUCN, this term, and it was picked up by the European Commission in 2015. And it's an umbrella term. So it's really to be understood like an umbrella term where you have a lot of different concepts that are embraced by this. So I'll mention some. For example, green infrastructure or ecosystem-based approaches. You would have also the whole palette of sustainable urban drainage systems. The US names it low impact development, like the LIDS is also part of NBS. So let's say that nature-based solutions, they embrace everything that has to do with nature-based processes, right? So, and then you have, for example, you have a whole palette of scales. So you have from the wildlife corridor, from an urban forest, to the roof of a bus stop, you know? So you have it in the object scale, if you consider like only a bus stop, which is like 2 square meters of green on top of a bus stop. And you can have like huge ecosystems that are also NBS. So it's a little bit complex to understand because scales as well.
Thank you, Daniela. I think that's very useful as an explanation. And yeah, now linking with this last answer, is there any specific, because as you mentioned before, yeah, you are part of European projects, but you're also Brazilian, and you know Brazilian cities, you have like side projects as well with some of them. So is there any example that comes to your mind of any nature-based solution in Brazil, let's say, that has benefits, proven benefits in rainforests?
Yes, yes, for sure. There are many examples. So you can mention, for example, in Rio de Janeiro, there are some reforestation, collective reforestation initiatives that are taken very seriously by local residents and together with the local government. And you would have like a whole reforestation initiative would also configure a nature-based solution. And it has to do with recuperating biodiversity, protecting what is still there, and of course, trying to rebuild, in some cases, wildlife populations. Or you can also correlate it with the regulation of temperatures. So you will have very high temperatures in Rio if you have asphalt, and if you have like the green that has been substituted by sealed impervious areas. So if you reforest these areas, of course, you will have a soothing of the temperatures, which is very important for citizens and also for nature itself. So, and it also, not to talk about the benefits about air quality improvement, and as Nia has mentioned, of course, dealing with the rainwater and also with the wastewater, you can also do a lot with the use of nature. So Rio de Janeiro has a lot of examples with the rainforest there. But you could mention also examples in the north and in the northeast. So the city of Ceará, Fortaleza, the capital, also has amazing examples in the city, and the city of Recife, which is in Pernambuco, they recuperated the whole waterfront with nature-based solutions. So yeah, I can leave some links here.
Yes, sure, please do so. It's extremely interesting. Last question for you, Daniela, is in this process of designing nature-based solutions and tropical cities, until what extent are local communities, may they be rural or indigenous peoples, involved in this process of co-creation?
Yeah, I think it's a very key question, Vero, and I think we need to get better at this, to be very honest. There are movements now, like acknowledging that it's important to involve the voices and the knowledge of traditional and indigenous communities. But I think we still have to work more on this, right? And not only for South America, I would say the same for Europe. It's the same. I mean, what about vernacular knowledge, right? It's not being honored as it should, right? In many of the NBS projects that we are using and that we are working on. So I think this is something that it's about including the voices that we not usually hear, and to make, like, how can we develop a communication process that is really respectful, right? That is not only like, okay, I go there, I make some interviews, I get the information I want, and then I leave. Mm-hmm. And I never talk to these people again. That's terrible. We don't want that. So it's about building trust, it's about building relationships. It takes time, and we have to be very mindful of expectations, right? Because yeah, we have to be sure that we don't create too much expectations, and that we are very, very clear about what can be done via the projects, right? So yeah, I think it's all about honesty and trust building.
Thank you very much, Dani. Now we're going to go to another field, which is the field of public procurement. And we have Josephine as an specialist on this particular topic and circular economy. But Josephine, tell us, because some of us are not so familiar with what urban procurement implies. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I think I'm going to just describe it very simply in a way that all of us are procurers. I mean, if you have ever bought anything for yourself or for someone else, if you have contracts with your electricity providers or water companies, then essentially you yourself as a private person have procured something. So that's just kind of, yeah, step away from this very abstract term. It's a process of purchasing. It's kind of a buying of something, and this is something that cities, just like us private persons, are doing as public authorities. It's not just cities, of course, it's also universities, it's hospitals, it's national government, international organizations like the UN, essentially, also in the private sector. I mean, yeah, so it's a process of buying. However, here's the difference. For cities, they are handling taxpayers' money, right? Any public sector organization does. And there is the responsibility that I see. Once you're operating with taxpayers' money, you're also supposed to operate in their interest to create public value through the services and products you're buying. And just to give a bit of a perspective as well, why public procurement matters compared to, for instance, private sector buying or individual consumption. So globally, on average, it's about 14 to 20% of national GDP is spent by public sector. And out of that, it's 2/3 that is spent at subnational level. So here is the relevance of cities just by the sheer amount of money that is being spent every day, every year by cities. And public buyers have a choice. They can either buy based on lowest price, or they can buy environmentally and socially responsible. So I hope that kind of clarifies what public procurement is all about and why it matters.
Absolutely. Josephine, I think it clarifies a lot. But now maybe we can use specific examples, for instance, of goods and services that the city purchases that are directly connected or indirectly connected to rainforest, or impact them positively or negatively.
Sure. And I think this question is super important and a challenge at the same time, because tracking impact is super difficult, right? In terms of what we are buying and what exact impact it's going to make, or how a more sustainable way of a service or like an eco product actually changes the realities in the local context. Those are very detached from one another. And just to put that out there before we going into details, I think overall we need more monitoring. We need more, let's say, information like from the local context, kind of based on the knowledge that is there, to inform the practices that, for instance, European public buyers are doing, instead of the other way around. So, for instance, we can look at the sector of food. We can look at the sector of forest products, such as timber, wood, as well as minerals that are needed for electronic products. And so, for instance, in Berlin, just to give you a bit of a perspective, there is this number that they buy 500,000 bananas each month for their schools. So that's a big amount. And if you just scale that up for every city in Europe, I mean, that's, I guess, a food item that you know, we could look at into more detail. And overall, of course, also kind of the feedstock that is being grown in former rainforest ecosystems. And so this is something where now more and more cities are looking to decrease the amount of animal-based protein that is part of the diets in schools or universities or the public sector canteens. So there's definitely something that where we can see things are moving along. And also, actually, we've been analyzing how cities in South America are procuring food items. And I think that could be really interesting to see as well. And from a lot of governments, there's often a support for family farms, directly having access to the public market, so that you don't have the kind of big monoculture, kind of industrialized agriculture to cater to the public sector market of food items, but instead to support smallholder farmers, for instance. And yeah, I mean, we need to look at what does that do with rainforest conservation.
Actually, Josephine, for me, it's like much more easy now to picture this link, public procurement and rainforest, and the example of food was like a revelation for me. Of course, public schools buying food for the kids there, and this food, where it comes from.
Let me give you another example, which I think is even more important, and something that we've been working on in a few projects lately as well, which is electronics. And I think that right now, for instance, in Europe, there's this big debate about a new supply chain law. Germany just passed one, kind of a responsible supply chain law. And this impacts directly on the conditions, working conditions, but also kind of environmental responsibility of global supply chains. And why does this matter? It matters because in every electronic product, such as our own smartphones or laptops, there are minerals inside, such as gold, for instance. And now that has to be extracted from somewhere, which is an issue because we have a finite planet with very limited resources. And now having this increased demand, for instance, through the digitalization agenda in many countries, more and more products are needed. And again, there are so many public sector organizations that are major consumers of electronic products. And so those range from phones for their employees to cameras installed in the city streets in the context of smart cities, that ranges from servers to power the whole digitalization of the public sector activities, right? And so often we have then ingredients such as gold, for instance, in smartphones. And if we're looking at how those are being mined, we find that there are major breaches of human rights, right? And also the impact that toxins used as part of the extraction process is really significant to local ecosystems, and not only at the place of the mine, but actually pollutes water, which is then traveling and really polluting the entire ecosystem, for instance, in the Amazon. And here, just to conclude on this point, we are working with public buyers to push the industry towards enabling fair working conditions for workers at every stage of the supply chain, as well as to ensure that the materials that are being used are not polluting or causing harm to the environment and all beings. Yeah.
Thanks, Josephine. The last question for you would be like, which of these goods and services, products are the most difficult to address from a sustainable, like from a sustainability point of view?
That's a tough question. I think electronics is super difficult because you have so many components, you have so many parts, and you have the big brands like Apple and HP and Dell that partly do things, but then there's so much that we don't know or that is always changing. As I mentioned before, you have all these kind of subcontractors, you have all these different stages. It's very complex. So by knowing what is going bad and by having the attention to change it, for instance, from a city's perspective, it's not going to happen because you can't influence, for instance, all the practices that are in place by all the suppliers. So it's not so direct, and that is what it makes, yeah, it's very difficult. And you don't have any labels like eco labels for electronics that assure that, compared to, for instance, fair trade certifications for food items.
Thanks, Josephine. Yeah, indeed.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Digital world and like electronics, it's a tough one. Well, now I will pick a couple of things. I mean, Daniela, you Josephine, talking or touching upon the importance of narratives and shifting the narrative. In your case, Daniela, shifting this narrative of we are gonna be pioneers in nature. We are gonna integrate nature. Like it's kind of asserting that nature is a separate entity, something that we're using as a product even. And in your case, Josephine, you're really hard to try to change the narrative towards a more circular, right? Towards a more circular procurement, circular economy as well. So now you are here, the expert on narratives, right? And is your role as well, or part of your role, to communicate or to, how you say, push these transitions in narratives as well. What is the status right now that you see in the many projects you're working on? What's the prevailing narrative? For instance, in relation with nature. In relation with nature.
I mean, narratives is crucial, and especially since we're talking about storytelling, which I know you already had a session on as well. In the European context, I think there was a big buzz about ecosystem services back in the day, which really framed nature as something that we get value from. And I think that was aggravating to many groups because that initially kind of put nature in a position where we harness it to our benefit and our purpose. But behind this actually narrative was the fact that policymakers and decision makers needed to use some sort of a term to communicate the fact that we need to put nature value on nature so we can argue for preserving it. So it's not as simple always as it seems. And these terms that might initially seem abrasive, they might have a purpose, I think, which everyone should remember. And ecosystem services has remained as an underlying term in the policy circles, and especially with these kind of European cities that we work with, because it's a term that they can utilize to actually talk and embed nature in their policy making. And then we have green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, gray infrastructure to help us categorize nature in the context of urban environments and cities. And now with nature-based solutions appearing as a more, I think, amicable, even though there are a lot of resistance to nature-based solutions as well, but a more amicable term maybe than ecosystem services, where we try to see how nature can be incorporated into cities, how it can be the solution, rather than it being something that we utilize to our end. And I see nature-based solution as a good term personally to be also used in a way where we notice nature more and integrate it more into our lives, especially in the urban context when it's quite often forgotten. So the narrative is crucial, and I think especially with European cities, nature-based solutions increasingly is being embraced among policymakers, and it's within the scope of EU policymaking already as a term, so it helps for them to communicate how they are reaching certain targets. So sometimes you need these terms like sustainable development even being the fluffiest term there is, but it is needed so people can agree upon an action. So sometimes I think we get stuck in discussing these terms and how much we hate them instead of when we should just agree, okay, they serve a point, we have to acknowledge the issues with them, but let's move on. I mean, what's behind these terms? And I would say it's nice to see these terms spreading and also maybe citizens kind of getting a hang of them or just seeing more nature in their vicinity and realizing that their cities are doing something. And I guess for cities, they most see they're functional entities. They need to reach a goal. They want more citizens. They want more taxpayers. So of course, I think especially in Europe, and I'm increasingly in global big urban cities, they are realizing that to attract new citizens, especially younger generations who are aware of these issues and are demanding more and know about these global goals, they do need to discuss them and talk about how they're planning on incorporating them into the current systems, promote them even, so they can actually attract and please the current citizens. So I think that's a positive development that we're seeing when it comes to communications within city administrations, that they are actually feeling like they need to communicate on them. And then gladly we have these global frameworks that do have goals. And if the citizens want to dig deeper, they can go and ask the cities or access or try to find information on how they're addressing this specific goal, sustainable development goal, or whether it's something within the European Union Green Deal and whatnot. So I do see that I see a positive trend in the narrative, to be honest.
That's great. That's great, Nea. I think it's needed, but also this is a quite a controversial question. So do you think that there's really a change in narrative and really more and more cities are buying into these new concepts and also the solutions that they represent? Or is there a risk that it becomes like a trend that we lose sight of the purpose behind these and city administrations end up going for these solutions because it's what's promoted from the European Commission, let's say, and because it's where the funding is and so on? Or is there a real interest?
I think there's a real interest because there are real goals, and I think people will be held accountable. And I think they're increasingly seeing that, how citizens are holding them accountable. So I think there's always a risk. I think there's always, let's be realistic, there's always going to be greenwashing. There's always going to be a lot of time and effort wasted on some solution that might not be the best just because it's listed in some policy. But between all of this, there are things that get through and that need to get through. And it's not going to be idealistic. And I personally, I really do see a need for the terms. in a practical way to structure things. And there are always risks associated, and greenwashing, I don't think, will ever go away. It doesn't matter if it's a commercial or a public or private context.
It will be there, but there's each time more ways to identify it. I think we're getting better equipped to detect it. To end up with this discussion now, because we see that as a communicator, you are communicating with the city administration as part of the projects you're working with. You're advising to the city administration on how to communicate these concepts to the city dwellers, and you're also enabling communication space across cities. And this is what you do in Network Nature as well. Tell us a little bit more about how to ensure a smooth cooperation process in between different cities, especially from Europe and from Occidental countries and from tropical countries, and what are the main points in the main common interest as well in between them.
I would say the charm of these big funded, EU-funded projects that we work on that gather cities to work together is the fact that we have the opportunity to have these channels where we can interact among each other and communicate. Network Nature, for example, being a project that's very much working on the background of gathering together the existing nature-based solutions, ecosystem services, green infrastructure, blue infrastructure community, so we can plan better how to synergize our efforts, what is already being done, what can we do, what can we enhance, what lessons can we learn from. And we also have within this project a European Union task force that gathers all nature-based solutions communicators together. So we can amplify our efforts, discuss what we're doing well to reach our target audiences, what we aren't, how we can streamline things, how we can better plan. So I think it's great to see funding going into these background processes and projects that essentially facilitate others as well to help us streamline efforts, so we're not all just yelling to the void and yelling the wrong message, for example. Peer exchange is crucial, especially when we have so many different target audiences we want to reach, and the best thing we can learn is learn from each other's experiences. And especially within this scope, we have also international projects, and we're discussing about how we can disseminate results in different languages as well, and in different categories and to different groups, and being learning from each other's experience of, like, let's say, communicating in Latin America, now that we're increasing having projects that are involving countries and cities further afield from Europe. So that is absolutely great to see.
Thanks a lot, Nea. And because we're getting close to the wrap-up time, I'm checking the chat, and there's actually a good discussion here. And there's many things ongoing, but I will rescue one of the questions here, which was very vaguely touched by Josephine. It says, what role, if any, do consumers and voters play in the work you do?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I can say from the perspective of public procurement, it does play an indirect role, I think, because the strategy of a city in terms of what to buy and what not to buy is inherently influenced by the current political colors in a way. However, there is no voting or veto right by citizens to intervene. I think that here it's actually quite interesting what is happening in a few places where researchers or activists found out that, yeah, their city would buy certain, I don't know, materials or stones from conflict regions, or where human rights would be violated or ecosystems negatively impacted, and they gave that a platform and made that point of a discussion, and then the public administration would change course. So I think, and learning from that, a lot of public buyers are aware that if they're not really mindful and purposeful about what they're buying and how their impact is across their supply chain, this may be an issue, and rightly so. So yeah, maybe that answers and gives a bit of background to that.
I would say yes. Thank you very much. Before we end, I would like to give the audience a last chance to type in any questions for any of you. Is tourism playing a role in this field as well?
I guess quickly from a communication standpoint, I can say that cities are increasingly seeing nature-based solutions as a resource for sustainable tourism and promotion. Especially I work in projects in Turin, for example, that they're realizing the gardens they're creating, therapeutic gardens and whatnot, and Zagreb as well, that you can promote these and attract tourists that are more maybe sustainably minded. So I see it's playing a role, at least from this standpoint, in promotion.
Daniela, what about you? That I see you vehemently.
I'm nodding, right? Yeah, I'm just going to put here, there is this link for this nature-based enterprise. This is like a platform for a lot of enterprises that are now actually being created to work with nature and to protect also nature, of course. And there's one community there that focuses on sustainable tourism. So it covers a lot this topic, and this group is like discussing with one another, you know, how to do it the right way, what not to do, and etc. So if you're interested, Nicolas, you can take a look.
Thanks a lot. I think it was very insightful to see the different fronts in which cities can influence one way or the other, not only rainforests, but nature conservation more broadly. I would say my last question for you is what role, because we have an audience, I can guess, mostly based on conservationists or people working in the environmental sector. How can conservationists, environmental scientists better work with you in or collaborate with you in the work you're doing? How to integrate their knowledge? Maybe Daniela, maybe this is like a question for you.
Vero, you mean the academic world, or you mean more the or different group?
Yeah, I was thinking more in researchers.
It's very important. I mean, if you think like for nature-based solutions, the knowledge base is still there are lots of doubts around the impacts of nature-based solutions still, unfortunately. So we have to work very hard to build up the knowledge base, and we need scientists for that. We need monitoring, and we need to, you know, indicators and to write things down and really like proof of concepts and all the like, you know. And it's very hard to measure the impacts of nature-based solutions, right? Because it's not so easy as it is for mathematics and for other, you know, or doing calculations. It's not, it's very complex because you have so many variables, but we have to do it. And for biodiversity, I mean, we're talking here about the rainforest. Biodiversity, we have to measure what we lose if we don't care for biodiversity. We have to put numbers on things, you know, really. And I'm not talking about monetary numbers. I'm talking about really the numbers of species being lost, and, you know, the numbers of medicine that we will not be able to count on, and the numbers of new viruses coming up, you know, see COVID. So yeah.
Right, thanks, Daniela. So this is a message for all. The public sector needs more environmental scientists, biologists, more conservationists in general. Yeah, and as always, I guess, as always, the secret is in cooperation and dialogue and breaking down the barriers of the different sectors and silos. So with this message, I would like to thank you so much for being here. It was a really enjoyable, informative discussion. yeah, and I hope that we can keep on with this dialogue, and we can keep on discussing and bringing the public sector in the work of conservation for the years to come. So thanks everybody, and thanks the audience as well.
Thank you, Vero, for having us and bringing this important topic to the table and giving us the platform to discuss.
Yes, agreed very much. And thank you, attendees.
Thank you all. Thanks, Vero.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.